Okay, so let's go and start. A warm welcome for this stakeholder meeting in this endeavor to create a global life cycle impact assessment method. I would like to thank first my co-chair and task force chair for all the work which have been done, but also each of you who has been involved because it's really a tremendous work to do that, and it's mostly benevolent or work we do on our evenings, and we do appreciate that a lot. So to introduce, I will give the floor first to Lorenz Milay-Canal to introduce us to the broader effort of the Lifecycle Initiative and for his welcome. Lorenz, you're on. So Lorenz is what is your title? You are the head of the Lifecycle Initiative, the
Yes,
UN officer, whatever.
I'm just someone who tries to get things happening. So yeah, Lorenz Milay-Canal, thank you so much, Olivier, and thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for your participation today, and particularly as from your participation across the globe. So it's very late and very early for some of you. So thank you so much. So yes, as Olivier was saying, I'm the head of the life cycle team in UNEP, and among other things, I'm the head of the Secretariat of the Lifecycle Initiative. So before we move on, and sorry, I will not take too much of your time, but we thought it was important to provide a bit of background or context of what's happening here or what we're talking today. We wanted to share the vision of the Lifecycle Initiative, which is this multi-stakeholder partnership that was launched almost 20 years ago, well, 18, but it was launched in 2002 in order to enable the global use of life cycle knowledge in informing decision and policy making. So the vision that is guiding us at this time is that we can and we will contribute to achieving the global goals, the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement and other relevant goals. We can achieve them faster and more efficiently if we target the key drivers for impact, and we can address the potential trade-offs with different options by following a life cycle approach. So in order to do this, the Life Cycle Initiative is working on the three main programs that you see here in these colors, in the colored boxes. So at the top, we're really working to mainstream life cycle thinking and life cycle approaches in key areas of policy and decision making. We're working with specific ones, and we have a target of at least achieving 4, but I think we already crossed that target. We're working in 4 or 5 areas already globally, and getting life cycle tools to inform decisions there. But we also have to develop life cycle capacity globally to do that. And in order to do that, well, we have some capacity development programs, e-learning modules that we've been talking a lot about lately as well. So hopefully you've seen some of those. They are certainly not targeted at experts, so you might not find them totally relevant for you. But actually, if you're teaching in universities, probably you would find some of our materials quite relevant as an introduction to life cycle thinking. And then, of course, at the basis of it all, and that's the most, that's kind of the important foundation of everything that we're doing, is the rooting on life cycle knowledge based on science. And for this, we're aiming to offer this life cycle knowledge platform that you see towards the right of your screens, kind of an interpretation of what this life cycle knowledge platform should be, where we want to bring together life cycle data through the global LCIA data access network, connect it as well with impact assessment factors through a global nomenclature system. So we're working on that, and certainly the work on the nomenclature, but particularly also the work on recommending characterization factors for life cycle methods has been the effort and the focus in the last several years. We're now going one step beyond, and that's the purpose of this project, is to then build towards the recommendation of a global life cycle impact assessment method. So on that, I mean, I will not delve too much into this because yes, let's move to this next slide. Where, I mean, essentially, without further ado, I just want to thank, as we do every time, and acknowledge the significant contribution that our funding partners have been providing through the years, and that have brought the initiative to you and contribute to the work that we're all doing. So, well, with a special thanks to all of them, I'll hand it back to Oliver, and yeah, I'll just hope that we have a very fruitful meeting today, and thank you all once more for your participation.
Thank you very much, Johannes. So just to recap, some of you, I've already used these slides, but we were working on this since 1992, in fact, at CTAC. It was 20 years ago. We contacted Human, launched in 2002. We had our 2 Glam phase 1 and 2, which were very important with these 2 reports, but were an individual category. And now we are really have the objective, which is creating a comprehensive environmental LCIA method covering the different step classification, characterization at midpoint and damage level, normalization and weighting for that. I've put Norihiro Itsubo's slide a bit structured with my designer who is designing my LCA class now online. And I think it's a nice review of what has happened since the early 1990s with some method which have moved here. We are creating now Glam 3, and we see that we are depending on inputs from Glam itself, but also I forgot the PEF will also have input here on this side from Recipe, from Lime, from LCImpact or Impact World Plus, that we're trying to arrive to a parsimonious method but consensus based that we have here. The organization, we are organized in 4 task forces: 1 human health, ecosystem quality, the natural resources and ecosystem services, and then the normalization and weighting and cross-cutting issue. That's what we are doing. And the goal, we wanted first a scoping process, which was framing the impact categories, the impact pathway diagram, look at the state-of-the-art gap and existing path, and then decide which impact category we plan to include and an implementation plan. And that's the result of this process that we are presenting you today. So in terms of the timeline, we are at the end of the scoping phase. We have a scoping document that you have a priori received by email, and with a template that you can use now to provide your written comment if you have written comment. But we welcome also the comments today. We will take notes of your comments. After each presentation of the task forces, we'll leave some time for comment. This is also valid to do that orally if you don't necessarily have the time or the NV to do it written, but we appreciate a lot also written comment to improve our work. It's not if you like, the scoping document is not a definitive document. It's a work plan essentially, but we welcome comment on this work plan, and then we will work according to the implementation there until having the first method at the beginning of 2022, and basically probably have a final workshop or in 2023. Okay. So let's, I stop here and I will move to each of the 4 task forces in a row, and Peter Funke will present, the chair of this task force will present it now. Peter.
Thanks, Olivier. Welcome, everyone. In our task force, we deal with all impact categories contributing to human health damages. And after the scoping phase, what we have identified are several focus areas that we will look into details for implementing and further advancing in the Glam phase 3. That include climate change damages on human health, fine particulate matter indoors and outdoors, and the impacts on human health, human toxicity, including the human exposure, toxicity side, and worker injuries, ionizing radiation, including radiation from indoor radon sources, then a new impact category, nutrition, and finally, water use and domestic deprivation as the final one that we are looking into details. We have screened several others, including physical exercises and their damages on human health, noise damages on human health, non-ionizing radiation from various types of sources, and major chemical accidents, for example. And for those, we are currently not pursuing them, but we are exploiting to see, okay, what are additional resources we could find, and if they are easy to implement, we might, over the course of the next year, still implement them and contribute to them. Okay, next slide, please. Going into detail for those that we are implementing, we are starting here with the climate change damages, identified as one of the main or most important contributors to human disease burden. And of course, it's very important related to climate change anyway. For current pathways, we will update epidemiological data. So we have additional cases per additional degree Celsius, and we will have also severity factors in terms of disability adjusted life years per case related to that. We will start from work from Anders Schreiber. We will look into latest IPCC reports, and we will also include Lancet reviews as the three main starting points for advancing and updating that impact category for human health damages. New pathways will also be added based on additional data that we will explore in the next year. And the pathways are actually listed here. I'm not going into detail because we are short on time, and I'm sure the slides will be available afterwards. Additional experts are required that has been identified in the scoping phase. We will reach out to some people that are very knowledgeable on the damage modeling of human health impacts from climate change. The lead here will be Annie Levasseur and Lea Rubčík, two persons that will really focus the next 1.5 years on implementing these tasks with contribution from other task force members, of course. Next slide, please. Second impact pathway is human health damages associated with fine particulate matter and precursor emissions indoors and outdoors. Here we have two modeling approaches that we can start from to model the whole impact pathway that's seen on the left side. That is an archetype-based use-tox compatible framework that was developed under the Glam phase 1 over several years and published intake factors and effect factors. And we have also available now different spatial model approaches for primary and secondary fine particulate matter. And we will compare them both, see what are advantages and disadvantages and compatibility with other impact categories, how it's done there. We will develop indoor and spatialized outdoor approaches, specifically for secondary particulates. We will look into parameterizations for indoor-outdoor transfers that goes really both ways, that are combustion indoor sources, for example, but also if you have wildfires outdoors, how they migrate indoors. We will build upon latest data from the global burden of disease, especially for the dose response, but also for the severity factors. The lead here will be Tom McCone from Berkeley and myself. Thank you, Olivier. Next slide. Topic number 3 is human toxicity, where we really start from the existing use-tox global scientific consensus model, but we add here components not only for environmental emissions, but actually also for chemicals that are found in products. So we are combining near field and far field environments. We introduce also worker exposure. Here we have different approaches. We are going to compare from Kelly Scanlon and others, Gaia Kishko, and you will see whether we adopted rather based on input-output approaches. That is actually consistent with worker injuries that are now also to be included here. We have a new indicator for developmental and reproduction toxicity, and we will adopt a global recommended WHO consensus model for the toxicity sites. Thanks, Olivier. Next one. We have nutrition as a new impact category. So we are distinguishing here both the direct nutrition impact during the use phase and indirect nutrition impacts from the food production phase. The main starting points here will also be looking into a framework that has just been established, the Health Nutrition Index, HENI, and we start from epidemiological-based nutritional factors, also using the latest global burden of disease data. Nutrition-related risks on human health are really the main contributor to global disease burden here. Marginal and non-marginal factors will be included, and we also look into developing different archetypes to consider different variabilities in the population and consumption pattern. Main focus for the indirect nutrition impacts will be on land use and water consumption, and here we will update actually a framework that has been recommended already under the Glam phase 1 for malnutrition. Katarina Stiliano and Laura Scherer will lead this impact category. Thank you. Almost through. I think we have one more to go here, and then comes still the radiation. That is water use and deprivation here. The impact pathway is shown on the left side again. We start also from a consensus that was already established for agricultural users water deprivation that is currently built into a thesis, and actually Anne-Marie de Boulay will supervise that, and Laura Debar will implement most of the tasks that are listed here. We build on this framework for watershed and monthly resolutions. We do not discriminate so far between groundwater, surface water. We're exploring that, how meaningful that will be. We will also use updated data using the latest global burden of disease again. So we are having more a kind of consistency here across impact categories now when we go to damage modeling. We check for the fate factor. There are some consistency problems we are still working on. And then we are combining different comparative risk tools with water quantities to really look into DALIs associated with water deprivation. Thanks, Olivier. The final impact category that we will focus on, including in the final method, will be ionizing radiation. There are already several approaches available that have been developed over the years by different working groups. Some of them are actually developed in a way that are completely compatible with the matrix and compartment system of use talks. So we will need to see which one is most appropriate as a starting point. And we need to also see if radon needs its own method or own model, or can be straight away implemented in one of these models. A radiation model will then be developed, and specifically for indoor radon, we start from building stocks instead of emissions of radon, really. And we have to develop factors for both exposure and effect side for radon. And we also need to include occupational exposures here, which is really important. Tom McCone will lead the effort, and we will see how we need additional resources for that. That's mainly it. We have one more slide that is actually cross-cutting issues from the human health. Next slide. That is the integration part. We need to look into how to include several things like nutrition, water use as part of the functional unit, rather than having it as an impact. So we will work together with people from the task force of cross-cutting issues here. We need to see that all impact categories can be linked correctly to life cycle inventory data to make it feasible what we develop on the impact assessment side. And we need to check overlaps across impact categories within human health, but also across different areas of protections. That's mainly the contributions for the integration side. Thanks, Olivier. That was mainly it from the human health side.
Thank you very much, Peter. We have foreseen an hour 90 minutes for this call, and so we have time after each of the task force for comments, questions. As I say, we'll take notes, and we are recording this call so that we keep track and take into account your comment. This is very important to us. So please and mention your name and affiliation perhaps when you speak. That would be great. If you can use your webcam, it's just nice. We are in a world where we don't see each other too much, so it's nice to see each other at least this way. Okay, so any question, comment to Peter? I know you have not got the time to read the 100 or the human health was already 60 pages, I think. But I mean, there could be either comments or explanatory question you would need.
Yeah, there is a question in the chat, Olivier. I just read that EMF, electromagnetic frequencies, and associated non-radiative, non-ionizing radiation impacts. We are having included that in our report, in the scoping report, that is one of the important pathways. Currently, there is no operational model for LCA purposes that we can just draw from and take it as starting point. And we don't have in the task force so far enough resources or manpower to really pursue that type of research, which would perhaps 1 or 2 years of a fully dedicated PhD person, for example. So if someone is, of course, able to provide inputs here or have a good starting point that we can explore further, that would be very welcome. Otherwise, we will not include it operationally in the final method.
Okay, thank you. Any other question or comment?
Okay, there's another question again from Vito about fine particulate matter, whether we can provide characterization factors as a function of the different sources for fossil, biogenic, others, even desert sand. So far, we have looked into, in Glam phase 1, we have explored a bit differential toxicity as a function of different sources, for example. And there are, of course, large important indications that desert sand does not have the same toxicity as particles emitted from diesel exhaust, for example. The problem is that there is no conclusive evidence so far, and perhaps we will explore that a little bit further, whether there's a new state of the art. But so far, there was no conclusive evidence of how to differentiate the toxicity as function of source. So for now, we are looking into the toxicity across sources is assumed to be the same, but we acknowledge that it is not true, of course. If someone has additional information on that end that we can take as a starting point to explore that again, I'm happy to receive that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question or comment, either live or in the chat? Okay, if not, we can always come back at the end. If you have some questions that are coming, just put them in the chat, and we will write them in the chat, and we will address that later on. So we'll move to the Ecosystem Quality Task Force. And Francesca, having had a family urgency, it's her right arm, Martin Dauber, who will present the scoping results of the Ecosystem Quality Task Force. Martin, thanks for stepping up, and you're on.
Yes, hello. Thanks for the introduction. So yes, my name is Martin Dauber, and I'm a postdoc of Francesca, and I have the honor to present the Ecosystem Quality Task Force. And in this task force, we're working and dealing with characterization factors, quantifying the potential disaffect fraction of species. And to kind of tackle this topic, we decided to split our group into 3 subgroups. The first one is the harmonization subgroup, which is working on harmonizing existing characterization factors. And the second group is the new impact categories, where we would like to develop characterization factors for impact categories which are not yet covered inside life cycle impact assessment. And the third group is the so-called vulnerability group. And as you may see here, this is in exclamation marks, because there in the previous phase also there has been a lot of discussion about what the term vulnerability means for people, for LCIA practitioners, for the field of ecology. So for us, we now define this as that we would like to consider that some species have a higher risk, have a higher extinction risk than others. So this is what we define here as vulnerability, and what we would like to develop here is a factor that transfers local species loss into global species loss. So this is a general thing for the task, and now looking a bit more into detail. So also the harmonization task splits into 3 main groups, and the first one is land use. And inside the land use, this has in the previous phase has been recommended as a tool for hotspot analysis, and now they would like to check if there can be an update, specifically to kind of update the taxonomic coverage and also the species richness. Can we include more? Has there been updates, especially also when it comes to can we include land use intensities? And in the land use characterization factor so far, there's already a vulnerability score included. So what do we have to change that this harmonizes with the new vulnerability score that we're proposing in the other task force? And for eutrophication, acidification, and ecotoxicity, in the last phase, so far they have only looked at the midpoint, and the task now is to kind of bring this to the endpoint level. And also specifically for the ecotoxicity, they will look at more at the data deficient toxic chemicals, and they would like to develop new QSARs And they would also like to update the severity factor, which is kind of looking at how to convert PAFs into PDFs. So this for the harmonization task. And inside the new impact category meeting group, as we're dealing with, there's a lot of new impact categories that we could cover. First of all, we kind of looked at what manpower do we have, what knowledge do we have in the group, and also which kind of impact categories would be the most important ones. And after doing this scoping there, we decided that we will look at climate change, marine plastic pollution, water consumption, and biomass removal by fisheries. So these are the 4 new impact categories that we would like to look at. And inside climate change, no, go back, Olivier, not that
Sorry.
fast. Yes, they will look at freshwater, marine, and terrestrial ecosystems, and they will look at CTPs, which are like critical tipping points. And for marine plastic pollution, there will be the focus on entanglement of species in macroplastic and the physical effects of microplastics. And here physical effects means like the ingestion and kind of the reduced food intake due to this. And for water consumption, we decided that we will look at the species discharge relationships, which are, and to use these to develop characterization factors. This method is already used, but it's not yet available on a global scale. And we decided that we will mostly work on developing the effect factor part and only perhaps on the fate factor part, as there's other projects working on this outside the Glam project. And the last one is biomass removal by fisheries. They would like to look at what's the impact from overexploitation of fish biomass on the species. Yes, and now we can look into this a bit more into detail, because when we talk now, for example, at climate change, as you can see in the framework, greenhouse gas emissions have a lot of can have a lot of different impacts. And what they decided inside this subgroup is that they would like to look at the temperature change, like for water and air. And then they look at the kind of, if we have a temperature change, by how much is the geographical range of the species changing? And then we can use this to develop PDFs for freshwater, terrestrial, and marine ecosystems. And for the critical tipping points, this is in a different project to kind of see, okay, what is going to happen if, for example, now the Arctic ice is melting as we reach a critical tipping point where we will not have ice during the summer anymore there. So this is where they will focus on climate change. Next slide, please. Yes, and for marine plastics, so there is outside Glam, there's the so-called Marilka working group, marine impacts in life cycle assessment, and they kind of set up a framework which is currently under review, where they kind of look at what kind of impacts can micro and nanoplastic have on the different areas of protection. And as we are kind of talking here about a time horizon of 2 years in this subgroup, they decided that they will look at macro and microplastic, and they will look then at ecosystems and then the physical effects on species. So inside this, they will look at this, they will narrow the scope to this, and they are hoping that if they narrow the scope, that in the end they will have a recommendation for 2 characterization factors quantifying the ecosystem quality damage of this macro and microplastic. Next slide, please. Yes, and this is the framing for water consumption. And inside this, we also decided that we will narrow our scope to the loss of aquatic habitats, and to kind of look what impact does this have on freshwater biodiversity. And here in the beginning, we had 3 different kind of scenarios or methods that we could look at, like the ecological niche, habitat suitability modeling, and the species discharge relationship. And we kind of decided that also based on the timing that we have and kind of how evolved the method is, that we would like to start kind of extending the species discharge relationship to a global scale. But we will also keep in mind that we have these other methods, and we will see if we have the capacity that we might also kind of develop a characterization factor for these and see what's the difference between these methods. And we had a discussion here also on On the fate factor, and as I already mentioned, it's kind of quite complex to model a water balance model, we decided that we will not update the fate factor inside this Glam group, but we know that, for example, I'm working with 2 other colleagues also on developing this fate factor, so we decided to leave this out, knowing that the people that developing the fate factor know kind of what the other group is doing, so that we will be able to harmonize them. Yes, now you can continue. And for the biomass removal of the fish, so what we can see here, what the maybe the main thing is in the fate factor, that they will decide split between kind of looking at the target species, what impact does it have if we actually catch the target species, but also to look at what's the impact of if we have bycatched and other fish species which are maybe not recorded, and then to see kind of what's the impact on the fish stock, and then to transfer this to the ecosystem level. And as this is like a rather new approach, I think there will be a lot of application to case studies. So here the question is how far can we get to a global scale, but at least it should be applicable on a case study basis. Next slide, please. Yes. And now the last task that we have is the vulnerabilities that I already mentioned. And here we decided to adapt the global extinction probability. This is like a factor which has been published in the Journal of Environmental Science and Technology. And this global extinction probability is accounting for the threat level of the species and kind of looks at the geographical range. And by using these 2 factors, it's calculating the extinction probability. And our aim is now that we can implement this factor into all impact categories. And it's for some of the taxonomic groups, it's already ready and applicable, but we've also seen that, for example, it's not yet covering vascular plants, crustaceans, mollusks, or other freshwater groups. So here we'll have to make an update of this global extinction probability. And also there's kind of different ways of how you're translating, for example, the IUCN threat level, because this is like categorical groups. How do we translate this into a number? So here we also have, there's different methods proposed. And here we kind of have to make a decision, how can we bring this into a number for a factor? Yes. And here we can see the results of the GP. And the good thing about this GP is that it's kind of, it's calculated on a grid cell level. And you can then aggregate these grid cells based on the spatial resolution that you need. So we're kind of quite flexible in kind of, we can either make it on a watershed level, or we can make it on a freshwater ecoregion level, terrestrial ecoregion level, or even on a country base. And this GP goes from 0 to 1. And basically, if the GP is 1, it means that if you lose the species in a local area, you will also lose it on the global scale. And if it's 0, that means if you lose the species locally, that there is no extinction risk on the global scale. This is just for the numbering. And we hope that in the group we can provide more of these maps in the end.
Thank you very much, Martin. So we have a question or comments here. So if you look at your chat, comments from Lorenz Milay-Canal that thanking for the overview, and one mentioning the input source for the Marilka project is the ad hoc expert group on marine litter and microplastic, AHEG. They're presenting some progress, and there is a link there if you want to do that. So we have a question from, yep.
So, yes.
We have a question from Amila regarding the marine plastic. How about the fate modeling in global scale? And second, did you mention time horizon is 2 years? So
yes. So about the fate modeling, yes, they're also working on the fate model. But as I know, they're kind of starting when the plastic enters the ocean. So that's the first kind of narrowing in scope. And then they kind of look at how much of the plastic is floating and how much of the plastic is going to dive down. So this is this is they're working on this global fate model. Yes, it's also part of this group. As also, especially for the Mawilker group, you need it, of course, for the entanglement and for the ingestion, but you also need it for the other impact categories, which are not covered in this working group, but they need it in general. So there is efforts in modeling the fate.
Okay, and second was, did you mention time horizon is 2 years?
Yeah, I
That's
thought so,
short.
yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so it's kind of, yes, that's kind of what was the choice there to kind of see which of the impact categories. As I also know that there has been some work previously done on the entanglement of plastic. So there has been done something. So that was also maybe the reason behind the choice of kind of saying, okay, we start with the marine plastic, that there, to make sure that there will most likely be an outcome.
Yeah, the question is about here the time horizon of 2 years.
I know that was the working group time horizon, yeah.
That's a working group time horizon. Okay, so that's not the plastic time horizon. Okay.
No, sorry.
Okay. Just to be clear.
Yes,
Thanks.
sorry.
No problem. Yes. So we are on a tight time schedule for another life cycle impact assessment. That's the message. Any other question from the floor or? Okay. I'll let a few more seconds.
This is Andrew Henderson from
Yep,
a variety
go
of
ahead.
places. We'll say University of Texas for now. Thanks, Martin, and thanks everyone for all this good information. The biomass removal from fisheries, does that include both farmed and wild caught fisheries that you're considering? Or is it only, I assume latter?
As I understood it, it's a wild fish. It's not from farm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, a priori, the farm fish should be part of the technosphere of the economy, which then has impact on the rest of the ecosystem.
Right.
In that sense, but would be, if you like, I mean, it's really on the wild, I think, the fish CFO.
Right. There's that interaction is pretty complex, and it's sort of like the farm field technosphere ecosphere boundary question. So anyhow, I think you're right to focus on the wild caught.
Yep. A comment from Vito there for task 1 land use. It could be possible to introduce a land scarcity index like water.
Yes.
Is that under study, or I mean, we could have Vito also. If you would say a bit more on that, that would be interesting.
The question here is how this can be linked then to the endpoint itself, because in the end, we kind of want to quantify a loss of species and not quantify it on the midpoint and see which is like the rarest habitat. We would like to know what is the impact of losing this habitat on the species.
Yep, and
that's why, of course, the land use intensity that might influence this, because if the land use is used intensively, the risk of losing the species might be higher than using it extensively. But just because something is scarce, it does not implement automatically that it might lead to species loss. That would be my answer.
We might, if you like, what we have done in water, where we have this water scarcity index, which is a midpoint but not really fully on the impact pathway. So we can sometimes still have a midpoint like that, but if we can, we prefer to really follow the cause effect pathway if we can. Okay. So perhaps let's move then to the natural resources and ecosystem service task force. So I mean, Tim, you're presenting?
Yep, I'll start and then pass over to Masaharu.
Thank you.
Great. If we just go to the next slide, or first slide. So just to, and one more click, thanks, Olivier. So we've just been looking at 2 impact categories, which are really focused on intrinsic impacts. We go back one, sorry. The intrinsic impact. So our focus is on instrumental values in the natural resources, ecosystem services area, and in the sort of minerals, yeah, in that area. So just to put that in place, we need to go forward 2 slides. So to remind us, the ecosystem services are a group of things which ecosystems, natural ecosystems, are providing both to human beings and also indirectly to other parts of the natural environment. But here you can see we have the ecosystem services framework set up with supporting services, provisioning, regulating, and cultural services, and they link to the constituents of human well-being. It's quite difficult to map this onto the life cycle assessment, impact assessment framework, because there is a lot of overlap with the technosphere and the ecosphere. But if we just go to the next slide, Olivier, we'll show you where we've got to. So here the impact pathway begins exclusively with land occupation and transformation under specific conditions relating to location, climate, soil, land cover, the land use intensity, and land management practices. That the way in which that land is used will have effects on soil loss and soil degradation. It will also have effect on water, both in reducing the water availability and degrading the quality of the water which is available, and will have an effect on biomass, above ground biomass, and both from a loss and degradation point of view. That then goes through really the changing ecosystem processes, where we are looking at how soils change, how water water availability changes, and many of these will go through to 2 damage points, which will be biomass production for human use and the freshwater provisioning for human use, both of which can link through to basically the natural resources, potentially in net primary productivity for human use. You will see lots of other grey arrows where really these same processes lead to impacts on climate, impacts on supporting ecosystem services, habitat provision, primary production in ecosystems. And so there is our intention is to focus on the instrumental values to directly for human use, and not to get into overlaps with the ecosystem quality and human health task force. However, you can see over on the right, we recognise that even in the provisioning endpoint of natural of NPP, net primary productivity for human use, that will have a direct impact on the human health outcomes for malnutrition and the like, and also there would be interactions from there with ecosystem quality. But our intention is that the endpoint would sit potentially at the natural resource area there. The in yellow are the models in pathways that we have established models for that are in use. We have some additional models that are in development that haven't really been checked to see how they'll operate in a global context. And in white are things which we have no available models for at the moment, or we haven't identified them, so they may well exist. That's in white over there, not these ones over here. To the right. If we just go 1 slide forward, Olivier. So to summarize those, we have in the operationalized models, we have biotic production. There are a few different forms of that, ways and options of how we may quantify that. Soil erosion, groundwater regeneration, infiltration, reduction, physiochemical filtration, and mechanical filtration. So they are not really 6 independent impact categories. They can be sort of midpoints that are leading to a common endpoint, or maybe 2 common endpoints relating both to water and also to general productivity. And of course, again, they also overlap with the ecosystem health impacts. We have some recently published models on salinisation and compaction, which we're hoping may be able to be included. And then there are some significant areas where we're not sure. Climate regulation via potential via the albedo effect. So that is really, and really there we were wanting to look at local climate effects rather than global climate effects. Pollination and the cultural aesthetic issue. So we, in terms of our priorities, if we just go to the next slide, our first task really is to nail down a endpoint, that NPP or maybe an economic endpoint, that we can link those disparate models that currently only go through to midpoint together. We then want to look at each of those methods and ensure the parameters that are driving them, they are largely large GIS-based data sets, then with some fairly big assumptions sitting in the background. We want to see how robust they are in a global sense. Do they make sense in all geographies? And are they consistent with each other? The third task would be to operationalize some of the newer methods that have been published to see if they can be included in this global model. And then the fourth would be to tackle some of those gaps, such as climate change and pollinators. And one more slide. Oh, that's it. So Masaharu.
Yes, thanks, Tim. And I'm also co-chairing this Natural Resources and Ecosystem Services Task Force. And with regard to the natural resources, compared to the human health and the natural ecosystem quality, we are not so much matured. So only specific the resources have their own characteristic, the impact pathways on, for instance, like mineral resources on the left on top, and freshwater use on the left, the bottom. And because of the complexity of natural resources characteristics, we don't have any specific or not specific, but generic the impact pathways that can cover overarching the impact pathways of natural resource use. Especially the Zondrega et al. Already developed the overarching the impact pathways on the middle of on the right. But still, it's more generic and not specifying any specific detailed cause-effect chains. And we also need to specify the damage which will be related to the natural resource use and to whom and to what. So this is our main scope to develop this kind of one of our main scope to develop this the impact overall overarching impact pathway for all kinds of natural resources. Next, please. And now this is just the current the preliminary results. So still it's under discussion, and we didn't get any the consensus on this the impact pathways. But we would like to emphasize that we have 4 specific the perspectives of the development of this the impact pathway. The first, we are trying to identify the pressure that can be as a trigger of the changes in the functional values of natural resources. So for instance, like transformation and occupation and translocation. By identifying these kinds of pressure, we can somehow connect from the inventory, I mean the elementary flow, to the impact model. And then the second point, we also try to determine the changes in the functional values of provision of natural resources like dissipation or depletion, degradation, deposition, and accretion, and so on. So this is the second point for the identification of the impact pathway or through the overall the impact pathway. And then we will also trying to evaluate, identify the associated consequences of natural the value loss, functional value loss of natural resources, but it's still controversial because whether we should identify any specific substitutional effort, or maybe we can just need to identify evaluate the loss of the functional value as such. So this is also another important point, but still it's under discussion. And the fourth point is the distinction between the technosphere and the environment, because natural resources used in both of the environment and the technosphere, and the instrumental value will be lost in both the spheres. So that's why we are trying to separate, distinguish these, the technosphere and the environment in the impact pathways. Next, please. One back. Yes, thanks. And the target impact categories as such, we are mainly focusing on the resource quantity change and the quality change. So in that sense, in priority, we are now trying to focusing on the resource use of minerals and fresh water, land and soil, because there are several the previous models we already have. So these are more promising the impact categories. And we also try to explore the potential inclusion of the natural resources use, resource use of biotic resources. And we also explore the possible inclusion of the resource quality change, for instance, like fresh water. So in that sense, it's a kind of more the overlapping the area with other area of protection like human health and ecosystem quality, but we also try to explore that kind of inclusion of these more the controversial the impact categories. And there are many kinds of the natural resources like air, solar, or wind power, and so on. So, but at this stage, we don't the focus on that the natural resource type. Next, please. So we are now mainly focusing on the definition of the area of protection such, and we are trying to develop the frame of the impact pathways, as we already showed. And then once we could consolidate the impact pathway and the area of protection specific to natural resources, and then as a third task, we will review the latest advances in LCIA methods, and then we test the feasibility or adaptability of these existing methods in the case study. And then we try to reach a consensus on the recommendation of characterization factors of natural resource use. So that's it from our side. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Do we have a question to Masaru or Tim Grant about the ecosystem services of natural resources? As you're typing them, one question to Martin about vulnerability, Dorber, could we consider the archaeology items in addition to species extension? I'm not sure I understand the question. Do you mean that the cultural values of human impact on cultural value, or what is meant here by
Yes.
archaeology items?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you do.
So
Yeah.
I would say if we look, I think we have a slide with the different.
Okay.
Here we had, if you like, we have focus on 3 areas, which is the human health, the ecosystem quality, and here the instrumental side, the natural. We have in the framework, if you like, the cultural heritage or the natural heritage, also flora, flora. I would say we have not focused on the man-made environment so far. Okay, and if you like, for 2 reasons, there is little work ongoing on that, which make it, if you like, difficult to include here. But if there would be interesting work, I mean, that would be at least in the framework be included. But clearly, the ecosystem quality here is focusing on the species disappearance, whereas indirectly that will be also important for landscape or natural heritage or flora fauna in that case. Okay. Okay. Other question. Suellen Tellman was asking, so many terrestrial damage pathways are investigated, no marine pathway.
Yeah, so
Yep,
we
that was
haven't
for
had
the
any.
ecosystem services. Huh?
Yeah. So look, if there's any established methods that could be useful, we haven't excluded them. Ones that we've found, we haven't found anything that will link in at the moment, but I'm happy to examine that.
Okay. Okay. Any other? What did we have? I think we're about done. Any other question or comment at this stage? So you can always comment with the template that we have, and that's, as we say, it's important and useful input. Okay, so let's move to the 4th task force, and Alexis Laurent and Alessandra Zamani are chairing this task. So I don't know who is going to start the presentation on normalization, weighting, and cross-cutting issues. Alessandra, or we cannot hear you.
Alex will start, Alex, and then we will pass on.
I will start. So my name is Alexis Laurent.
It's
So I co-chair.
the quality of the sound is not great.
Okay, that's
better. Go ahead. Try to go ahead.
Then is it better now? Okay, I'll try, and otherwise, Alessandra, feel free to step in.
Okay, that's okay.
So so I will start the presentation, and we will also do a little bit of ping pong with Alessandra. Right, so the scoping of this task force, so you have on the slide here is the LCI phase, the LCIA phase as well. And we're going to focus on 4 tasks. I'm sorry, I have some animations, Olivier, so I have to make it work a little bit. If you could just run all the animations at once, that would be easier, I think.
Okay.
Did you hear me, Olivier? Or?
Yeah, I've moved that. I think.
Can anyone hear me?
We can hear you, but you're frozen.
Hello, can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. That was on the previous. Sorry for that. Right, so what you see on the slide, I hope you still see the same slide as me.
We are on the goal and scope with all your,
okay,
your
12
data.
all day and okay. Is it? Can you hear me now? Or
yes, we can, but go ahead.
Okay, I'll try to continue and then you. Right. So what you see circled in green on this slide are all the four. That's all the. There's a huge time delay in my voice and what you hear, but what you see on this slide with the four green boxes are all the four aspects that that we're going to look at in this task force. So normalization, weighting, and then we have cross-cutting issues that include the LCIA connection, which has a separate task, and then a number of consistency issues, and each of them would be briefly explained in the next slides. So if you could move on, Olivier, if you please.
People are seeing the slide, but it seems your connection is really slow.
What's happening?
You can speak,
Okay.
Alexi. You don't see the slide, but people do.
Yeah. So for normalization, the main two objectives are essentially to calculate a set of global normalization references, and there we try to increase the current consistency of existing normalization inventory, if we can call them like this, by increasing the substance coverage. The pesticides is one of the weak points in all existing inventories. We're going to work on that. We're also going to look into covering flows of the new impact categories that have been presented before. For example, in human health, we have some nutritional, new impact categories, like nutritional impact that we need to look into. Trying to strengthen the consistency overall of those inventories. And last but not least, we'll explore also the ability to quantify uncertainties of those normalization references. That's really an important point, as it is really regarded as a weakness for application of normalization right now. So that's the main objective, the first objective about the calculation of those global normalization references. The second objective, in parallel to the first, is to develop a guidance document, how they can apply normalization, so trying to improve the current practice. And on the second level, to dedicate it to the method developers on further research on how to improve the normalization references. Right, so if we move to the next slide, Olivier. So I assume that you see the Gantt chart briefly.
Yes, we do.
Right. So this is an idea of the timeline where we are currently conducting a literature review, and early next year, and following the. Right, and following this, we are going to work on developing this normalization inventory, and at the end calculate the normalization references. In fact, the second yellow bar you see should be pronged all the way to 2022. That's a bit of a mistake here. And the second main objective, which is the development of the guidance, this is the last yellow bar at the bottom, will also start early next year and be a working document all along the subtask work. So that's it for normalization. If you move on, Olivier, then I will let Alessandra take over, and hopefully you will hear better than you can hear me.
Alessandra?
Okay, yeah, let's try if my connection works well or not.
This is better.
Great, I'm happy to hear. So for the weighting subtask, following and mirroring the work done in the normalization, also in this case, the purpose is to guide the choice for weighting methods and also for indicator aggregation. And this will be done according to the goal and scope, so according to the problem formulation. This is an important part that you will see also further stressed and recalled in the specific objectives and actions. So this general purpose will be achieved through two main objectives. The first one relates to the development of guidelines. So guidelines are key outcomes of this phase because they serve the purpose of selecting the most relevant methodologies to determine weights. And this will be done according to the different decision contexts. For developing guidelines, there are specific steps to be undertaken. One of these involves the development of a common nomenclatures and definitions. So this refers to the development of a glossary, which covers definition both from the field of LCA and the multi-criteria decision analysis. And this is a key point, and weighting as its own theoretical background in multi-criteria decision analysis. And the subtask itself brings representative of both fields of expertise. So it's important to define a common language shared also with the normalization subtask as well. And activities have been already carried out in this regard, and the first draft document is already available for further inputs also from all the stakeholders. The other actions in order to develop the guidelines is to carry out a review of methods in order to define which ones could be selected in order to further develop weighting sets. The evaluation of weighting methods is based on a set of criteria which have been currently defined. Criteria include, for example, issues related to scientific robustness, but also to method transparency, to data requirements, and many others. And the list of criteria has been developed and prioritized by the members themselves. And currently, it's, I would say, partly a lively document that will be adjusted also according to the outcomes of the review process itself. And then as outcome of this guideline developments, we expect that the connection between normalization and the weighting will be for sure strengthened. And we will do so also by formalizing the dependency between these two key steps in the impact assessment stage. The second objectives refer to the development of the weighting sets, which will cover all the impact categories of the Glam impact assessment methodology that you have seen before. The main focus will be on developing weights at damage level, and the suggested approach that weights at midpoint level can be then derived from the weights at damage level. And whenever this approach can be applied for those cases in which there isn't a direct link to the indicators at endpoint, they will be addressed separately and depending, of course, on their relevance and depending on the manpower or resources within the subtask itself. And the developments of weights will, of course, be done implementing the guidelines themselves. So first, weights will be developed for a specific decision context, because we said at the beginning that application is goal and scope dependent. So a decision context will be selected first, will be determined, and then the guidelines will be used to determine which weighting methods to select and to apply, and then the weighting method will be applied for derive the weights. And last but not least, the ambition is also to develop also uncertainty for the weights, for the derived weights. And the uncertainty work task will be carried out in line with the requirements set in the uncertainty working group under the consistency issues. And you can move to the next one. Thanks. This is just an overview of the planning. As I said before, the glossary is already there. There is a first draft, first finalization in November, but the draft is still open for further input and will be also updated all along the process with the first deadline to complete it by the beginning of next year's. The same applies to the review of weighting methods, so it's already started. All the process of guideline developments and weights developments will be part of the next years, where more specifically the weight calculation will start just before the end of 2021 and will last up to June, July 2022 in order to deliver the outcome for the weight papers and for the sharing them with the stakeholders. You can move, Olivier, the next slide, please. Okay, regarding the other subtask is related to the inventory and impact assessment connection and to Glam implementation itself. So here the purpose is to define a way of linking inventory and impact assessment which shall be consistent as much as possible. And this is achieved by means of acting on two different and two separate objectives. The first one relates to the identification of all the possible sources of inconsistency that there is in the linking inventory and impact assessment, and to define also potential recommendations. This work doesn't start from scratch because it is built upon the outcomes of the previous Glam 2 phase, where consistency issues have been already identified. So they need to be prioritized, as you see, as one specific action of this task. And prioritization will be done in the three main areas identified as a source of inconsistency, such as, for example, modeling limitation, which might refer to unsolved issues in spatiotemporal differentiation, in data quality requirements, or in the topic related to specification and level of details, which include issues such as, for example, the lack of a specification for substance properties and many others. Also in this task, there's the objective to develop and quantitative characterization of uncertainties, or at least to explore, still aligned with the working group of uncertainty under consistency issues. But there are also two key initiatives which refer more to the governance of the system. So the first aspect for the identification of source inconsistency related to governance is about the creation of this collaborative governance body. This body is conceived as a system that has the purpose of facilitating collaboration and implementation and maintenance of what would be the recommended practice. Of course, this initiative will be coordinated with the GLAD in order to avoid overlaps and to exploit synergies as much as possible. In addition to the governance body, this subtask will also set up a system for tracing information related to impact assessment and inventory connection. So it's considered as a system where as a single place that can keep trace of all the information and versioning and allow an easily update and maintenance of the information themselves. And last but not least, second objectives refer to the implementation of the Glam methodology. So the Glam methodology will be provided in a format that can be easily implemented in any LCIA software and used by practitioner without consistency problems. You can move to the next one, Olivier. Yes. For the implementation plan, the governance system discussion is already in place. We aim to have a first agreement on it by the end of 2021. While for the open system, traceable system, we aim for getting a first draft of it, a first version of it by the beginning of next year. While all the implementation part, of course, will be mainly devoted to the last period of the Glam phase, because it requires to develop first the requirement for the format, and this will be done next year, and then to start with the real implementation from 2021 and 2022. Okay, we can move with the next one with the consistency. If Alex connection works properly, I will pass.
Yes, can you hear me?
To Alex. Yes.
Yeah, okay, I'll give it a shot. Right, so the last subtask is on consistency issues. As you can see on the slide, subtask in a sense that it addresses diverse issues. The purpose is to facilitate the dialogue between the three task forces, the first three that we've seen today, and to provide recommendations on a number of issues, cross-cutting issues. Map the current practice and also and where relevant also to harmonize the choices and guidance for those other three task forces. Olivier, if you could just do one more click, if you please. So you can see on the slide here we have a number of topics. There are 8 of them, including spatial differentiation and aggregation, time frame, reference state, the provision of both average and marginal characterization factors, consideration of also consistency between midpoint and endpoint indicators, and harmonized modeling also contributing to several AOPs, like climate change, for example. And we also have a last point on the alignment of the cause-effect chain modeling as well. So all those points, I'm not going to go in details for them, but many of them, in fact, were
I think
we have lost Alexis.
yeah, so go ahead, Alessandra.
Can you hear me again?
I think it's a bit hard, so perhaps we have Alessandra finishing and then we can take questions.
Okay, Alessandra, yeah, please go on then.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry for that.
No problem. Well, you went already through the list of topics to be addressed for the consistency issues. They were also recalled by Peter in his presentation. So this is a preliminary list which is intended to cover most of them, or at least the most relevant ones that we were able to identify at this stage, as was mentioned by Alex. But of course, this is a work in progress, so there will be a strict interrelation among the different task forces just to monitor potential inconsistencies that might raise and that have not been mapped so far. We can move to the next one. I think that there's still, yes. The last one specific initiative under the consistency subtask is related to the setup of uncertainty working group, which is aimed at developing a recommendation and guidance for developing uncertainty evaluation in all the other subtasks, as we have seen. Developing an uncertainty factors or quantification or evaluation of uncertainty is a common goal for all of them. These guidelines or recommendation will be targeted to assess reports and interpret the use of uncertainty information for characterization results. And it will be targeted to LCIA practitioners first. And it will serve the purpose also on to ensure consistency in uncertainty estimates across the different steps of the impact assessment phase, so not just characterization, but also normalization and weightings. And this part will be mainly directed to methods developers. As I mentioned, there will be coordination among the different task forces and subtasks in order to have a common guidance and an harmonized guidance on the development of the uncertainty evaluation. Last but not least, one objective is the one, of course, to develop uncertainty factors themselves for all the Glam characterization factors. And this, of course, requires efforts and contribution from all the subtask members. And yes, I think that's all. Okay, that's all.
Okay.
And yeah, we are happy to take suggestions and comments. And
Yep.
there are also the co-chairs of the subtask involved, so all feel free to intervene.
Okay, so we have a question here regarding weighting. So there will be a sort of classification of different type of decision contexts. Could you provide an example?
Yes, I will and will invite also Marco to briefly explain the classification of decision context that has been done so far, because currently they have been framed in terms of exemplary cases, but there might be more detail. And yes, Marco, you can jump in.
Okay, thank you, Alessandra, for passing the mic. I would say that in terms of decision contexts, for now we have been discussing the different types of decision recommendations that might be required by this type of application, which means that the user might be interested in having a ranking of the alternatives. And in that case, we have a ranking type of problem. The ranking can be driven by a single score. So as you have mentioned, this could be a possibility, but as part of the guidelines, we also consider the possibility of obtaining a ranking that is not driven by a single score. And this is a set of MCDA methods that belongs to a different domain than the single score oriented ones. We are also looking at different types of problems in the sense that we look at sorting problems. So what if the user wants to have a classification of alternatives in preference order classes, for example, medium, good, and or poor. And the third decision context, well known, is the choice one. What if the user wants to select only one alternative or a subset of alternatives? And regarding the other point, was there? Yeah, and yeah, that's it. So I think this answers the
Yep.
consideration there.
I could just add, in addition, that I think the weighting score are also useful just to compare the different impact categories and across the category, I would say, without deciding, but helping to put them on a similar scale. So that goes to aggregation to area of protection or single score. So first, the aggregation to area of protection is made in the damage characterization, which is a priori based on natural resources, on natural science, and not necessarily on weighting. But the weighting should make the score in the different area of protection, in a sense, comparable. And we can sum them up, but it's already getting comparable score would be of interest. Because in many cases, it's a question of interpretation, not only choosing one alternative. I mean, we want to compare, for example, what or identify within a life cycle, what are the stages, what are the substances, the inventory flow, which are dominant and we need to address in priority, for example. That would be another application where just having comparable factor will be interesting in that sense. Okay, regarding yep.
I know, sorry, just to follow you up. Indeed, the purpose of the weighting is really to support the interpretation part. So, of course, the purpose is not just to come to a single score, and this is the reason why we explore the different uses on the weights according to the decision constant, really in order to support taking decision out of the study. So to support the mail interpretation part.
Yep. Thank you. Question on normalization. Regarding normalization, do you consider using directly the global normalization, or you can use other approach such as planetary boundary? Is this still in definition, or is it already complete? That's from Marcel Marceno. Marcello.
Yes, Alex has already provided the feedback. I don't know whether Alex, would like to speak.
Okay.
You can't speak, but the main issue that in terms of coverage within the guidance document, they will be certainly included, but the focus on developing will stay on the global normalization reference.
Yeah, I think that the carrying capacity are interesting. It's sort of distance to target approach. If we go back to earlier methods or the Swiss eco point or the eco indicator at that time, and are I think interesting reference points, I would say. Okay. Any other question on the process? We have 2 more minutes, so that's your last chance to make a few questions. Thanks for everybody for keeping the timing. I just want to thank the support of Lorenz and also Laura Williamson at the Secretariat, at the UN Secretariat and the Lifecycle, etc., for their marvelous support of our work, both financially and in terms of infrastructure and all that. Thanks a lot. Okay, so if we don't have any other comment, you're most welcome to provide your detailed comment on the 157 pages, I think. We don't expect that everybody will read each of them, but you can focus on your area of special interest and then provide just, if you have comment on one part, you can just do it and focus on that, okay? So thank you very much. Last word, Lorenz, do you want to conclude?
Sorry, I just wanted to say thank you and bye-bye. No, but thank you very much. It was yeah, very, very packed and nicely run. So thanks again, Olivier and everyone.
Yep. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Let's continue the good work. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Vito. Thanks for the nice comment, Vito.
Thank you. Thank you, Olivier. Bye bye.
So where are you, Vito?
Milano.
Milano. Okay. You're working in which institution?
I work in a little company, consulting company, by myself.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Excellent. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye. Bye, Olivier.